This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Kevin Mulcahy. He discusses strategies to keep participants within sport, the challenges academies face in providing appropriate environments for young people to flourish, as well as constraint led coaching approach. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. So, Kevin, thank you very much for bearing with me there. Obviously, I had a podcast just before, as I mentioned to you, doing a double header today. But I know we've caught up a couple of times now. But yeah, really excited for this conversation. How are things your end? All okay?
Yeah, very good. Enjoying sporting, coaching life at the moment. Lots of challenges, few new things, had probably... It wasn't for me, but for the players, like a really dramatic loss on Sunday, which I hadn't really been involved with before. I realised my involvement with basketball is kind of S&C and the performance coaching. I don't come from basketball. I couldn't coach the sport per se, But under 18 National Cup quarterfinal, really amazing game. And we were 5 or 7 points up in the last minute at one point, but it got down to 3 with, I think, 11 seconds left. And they had an international and a particularly good player. And they worked it to him, as would be expected. And at 4 seconds, he got the 3 away, but he got fouled and it went in. Okay. So it was a 3+1. So I've never seen the like of it. Like, it was really dramatic stuff. And we were away, so their crowd went bananas. And it was hard for the lads to take that, you know what I mean? And it was an interesting thing, like it was such a contrast game, and I enjoyed the style of fights kind of stuff. We would not always, but the teams here tend to be a little bit smaller, right? But all the players now at this age have come through a constraints-led approach to coaching basketball. And some of the coaches there are really, really good, and they've taken this on. And it's a very, very interesting and positive club. Massive numbers retained. But they just play a different way. You can really see it when they play, particularly the better big teams, who'll have their 3 or 4, 6'5", 6'6" guys. So it was a real contrast of power versus, and I wouldn't say a lack of skill on the opposition. There wasn't. There was a lot of skill, but it was... so just watching that, I had basketball can be so dramatic because of the shot clocks, because of the timing. We probably don't get as much of that in the Gaelic sports or soccer and stuff like that. So, but yeah, all good, loads of interesting. And then I'm doing the practice design online course, which is going really well. And I've been really lucky at the people that I got onto the course to help me with it or to present and be part of the different sections. So it's a 4-week course. There was an introductory, which I did, and a little bit theory-based, a little bit framework-based. And then we're doing children, 5 to 12, youths, and then adult/elite. And I've got different people in for the weeks, but the children one last week it surpassed my expectations, even the people presenting, which was great. So I'm busy and, coaching, and, that's what I enjoy.
Perfect. So I think that, really nice overview in terms of loads of fingers in pots, etc. Obviously, I came across you via social media, and we had a catch up last week just around our experiences and some things that we probably agree on, some things that we challenge each other on, which I think for me is why this podcast is going to be really exciting, because I think that actually I don't see a lot of healthy dialogue about these types of subjects and kind of people going, actually, I agree with you on that point, or I concede you on that point. So I'm really excited for it. For people that maybe don't know you, don't know your background, do you want to kind of give a brief overview of, I guess, who you are, what you currently do, I guess some experiences that have led you towards the way you work and whatnot?
Yeah. Okay, I suppose I am an S&C coach, right? That's my bread and butter. I work largely with athletes, teams, online and offline. I've been doing this for probably 10 or 12 years now. I did work in other industries, but I've coached. I'm heading into my 30th year of coaching. And I would have started off local volunteer, and a massive chunk of it was that, all the ways from local Gaelic football and hurling, which is the Gaelic Games of Ireland, or GAA, as people might know it. It covers a number of sports, actually. It's often forgot that it's more than hurling and football. There's rounders and handball as well. But so hurling and football would have been the traditional local sports that I played. And I think I'm driven a lot these days by my experiences, like we all are, I suppose, to a large degree. Participation or attention has become a bigger thing. The more educated I became, the more people I spoke to, and more experiences I had in working with other coaches, allied to the positive experiences, or negative in some cases, that I either experienced or observed. I was very lucky with the coaches I have, and in hindsight now, as you get older, looking back, I think that was a large driving force of me even getting involved in coaching. In fact, in one case, one of them, who was being brutally honest with me, I think picked up on my interest in sport and just being involved in general, had told me I wasn't going to be an elite player, and in the same line was telling me he thought I had capabilities of being a coach. So he was cutting the legs from under me and throwing in a positive at the same time. But he got me involved in coaching quite young. So I was 16 when I started. And just, helping out under 12s, under 13, smaller kids at different ages. So that's brought me through 3 continents. Lived in America, lived in Australia, and obviously Ireland. And just massively varied roles, which I'm very grateful of now, being an assistant coach, to manager, to S&C, to whatever, and now I've probably expanded in the last couple of years to some coach education stuff, and a private sense generally, and performance coaching with teams as well, where I'm just trying to generally improve the performance of a group, a club, or a team.
Perfect. So yeah, I think loads of experiences to draw on and whatnot, and I think that loads of different cultures and stuff, which will obviously do stuff in a very different way, which will be helpful for this. So I think a really nice starting point for us is probably around the physical side of I'm not going to say performance, of playing sport, because obviously with your S&C background, there's going to be an element of that, looking at that, trying to develop young people or trying to develop professionals in terms of their physical performance. But I think from speaking to you previously, one thing you're really big on is around this bio-banding, rate of growth type work, and understanding how puberty can affect children along their development pathway. So I guess the first question for me around this is, what drew you to understanding and developing and then I guess highlighting the bio-banding type work that was going on?
I'll be honest, first of all, like my kind of understanding of how bio-banding takes place is rudimentary enough, okay? But I do see some value and possibilities in it. So that's where I'm at, and I think there is, at a very basic level, even at club level, we can get a bit creative, okay? So I suppose the whole thing is underpinned by always in my entire life seeing kids give up, right? And through a lack of awareness rather than bad coaching, because some of these people were really good people. And I survived because I connected with these very same people. So that kind of survivorship bias that I can now put a language to was something I watched and experienced. But I was just, maybe my family, my dad encouraged it. I had the resilience or the interest or motivation, I suppose, to stick at it. When I was being challenged, because I wasn't a superstar, let's say, it didn't come particularly easy to me all the time. So I think that's the genesis of it for me. And then in the last 10 years, 12 years maybe, between Australia and being back home here the last 6-ish years, is talking to parents and people contacting me about experiences of kids giving up. So that kind of led me to needing and obviously my study and my education and all that kind of stuff as well, to wanting to find out more, and then seeking out people who had more information than I had about it, or were working in areas, Kevin Murray is a friend of mine locally who was that few years ahead of me in his journey, I would say. And he was working with schools and kids and looking at retention and participation in his local hurling and football club. People like Mark O'Sullivan, who works with IFK Stockholm, talking to them and influencing them. And they were putting, and then learning about some of the theories and, motivation and all this kind of stuff. And that started putting language and frameworks to what I couldn't articulate or quite understand in the past, let's say, and it allowed me to explain to parents, what was going on, which then led me to working with coaches and clubs who actually wanted to do it better. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I think that for people that maybe don't understand what this looks like and what this means from a practical perspective, do you just want to explain to everyone, I guess, from your experiences or the work that you do, what are the challenges faced regarding dropout of players, and why, from a physical perspective, does this potentially happen because of the way that we've traditionally coached within those particularly puberty type age groups?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. And for me, I can give an example of hurling because I know it, I played it, and I coach it, right? And very broadly, there's loads of people doing good work, even within what I would consider a negative framework, right? It's over technical too soon. So if we want to look at like movement before skill, even though I've kind of shifted towards movement with skill as an idea, that if we can't move fairly well, if we don't even have the biological capacity at 5 or 6 to do some, lunges, right? I always give the example in hurling for lunge because one of the traditional pickups in hurling to pick up the ball off the ground is you literally lunge down, and a lot of kids can't do that or can't do it very stably, say, right? But then we add a stick and a ball, and we ask them to do a highly complex move for something that, the movement isn't there, and we're adding the skill in inverted commas. And that we feel that if we practice just that, right? So that there's that approach, which will be, for someone like me, if I was 6 now, 7, that'd probably be okay because I was motivated to, I was drawn in by the glory of the local hurling teams. I was going to games with my dad, all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of in that world. So I probably would have stuck at it, right? But we don't just want all the kids that are like that to stay at sport. We want to, allow everybody the opportunity to, I suppose, exhaust the sport so that they go, I just don't like it, and that's fair enough, right? So there's that technical element as well. There's a little bit of harsh and egotistical coaching going on as well, but I think that's a minority, but it can be very negative, right? But most people are genuinely trying to support and help. So there's the movement and the physical part, and then I think there's the simple, boring part. That if you do that and you stick at that in a repetitive fashion, and you do that for a number of skills, where we got to get this technical stuff right before you play the game. Kids between 6 and 9, well, really anyone, to be honest, really even adults would tell you this. Like, I just want to play, I just want to play the game. And there are many elements, okay, to participation and retention. Some of it is outside the sporting arena. Some of it is family. Some of it is school, culture, social. And I think that's why I've been attracted to the Constraint Led Approach, and because it helps in those theories, it helps explain the constraints of people. That's not just in the coaching room on the day designing a training session or a practice, or improving at role picking, or improving at heading the ball, or whatever, It's understanding that every kid comes in with constraints, socially, culturally, environmentally, and all that side of it as well. But that when we do have it for an hour, we want to build a connection to the friends. That'll happen probably fairly organically if we allow it, right? If we don't segregate them too much, or line them up too much, or drill them too much, let them play and chat and let them be themselves. And an attachment to the club, okay, which can start really young, and then an attachment to the sport, which probably comes a bit later, in my opinion, right? And we do various types of research that supports those ideas as well. But I think anybody who's had kids, is around kids for a long time, understands them at these development. I think intuitively we know this stuff, However, we're still, in some cultures, in some sports, and it varies country to country, sport to sport, and it even varies here in Ireland, let's say, if I'm going to use hurling, from club to club and county to county, where some people over here are doing it really, really progressively, and some people aren't. And so I think the over-technical models and it not being fun, maybe because of those over-technical models, are a huge problem. And we didn't really practice sport when I was growing up till 9 or 10. And I still question why we've gone back there. Now, we are where we are, and we have to live in the world that we live in and not the world we'd like to live in, right? And we always have to be careful of being overly nostalgic. And it is what it is. And kids are going to sport at 5 and 6 now. So I think now what it's about is giving them the best experience possible with supportive help from qualified people like me and you or others, or actually people like us actually doing the work,
Perfect. So we'll come on to, I think, the academy type systems later, because I think that is a really good discussion around that. I guess the question that some people will have around that is they're saying, if in order to play the game, we feel like they have to have this basic technical skill to actually be able to do it. And, that might be like, you might have a 6 or 7 year old boy or girl watching the World Cup at the moment who says, actually, I want to go and play football because I've seen Brazil do this amazing thing. And the coach that they go to says, okay, in order for you to actually be able to play football, you have to be able to pass and receive, or the example you used around being able to pick up. How can coaches develop these skills within a constraint-led session rather than it being drill-based? Because you might get a lot of failure by them not being able to do the basic skill, which then leads the wider game to breaking down or them having very limited success at that moment in time. So what does that look like from a practical perspective of them developing these skills within a more game type session?
Okay. Do you want to give me an age?
Okay, let's go 9 years old.
Okay. And a couple of years playing around with the club or kind of involved. Yeah. The first question I have, or challenge for me there, is what is a basic skill? For me, immediately we're jumping into a highly technical model there that this is the only way to do something. Okay? There is definitely optimal ways of doing things. But all the learning research and experiential and anecdotal and every kind of experience I've had shows that if we fail, we will learn better, right? Now, there is a skill to coaching and creating an atmosphere and an environment where failing is okay. So if the coach is not going to do that, the methods probably matter less. I won't say they don't matter, but they matter less, okay? So what is basic skill, And that's the first question. If someone comes in and says, I want to do what Neymar did there, like the first thing is have a go. And then you'll know, right? So have a go, then you'll know. And let the kid have a go at it. And have a go at it again. So we can have our cake and eat it with this stuff, I think, right? So we can do some technical stuff. I would have a gains first approach, right? And that, so to look at some of the Belgian stuff where they went 1v1, 2v2, they were working off the children's psychology and neurobiology at those ages, It's like children at 5 and 6 are selfish. So it's like me and the ball. And then I know I'm getting away from the 9-year-old. I will jump back to that. But and then it's me and my friend and the ball. And then it's us and the ball at 7, 8, 9. It's not linear like that, but that's the general thinking. So they went 1v1, 2v2, 3v3s, and then to 5v5s and all that kind of stuff, right? But that's us still thinking about the game as adults, like 5v5, we're going to have a goal here and a goal here, and you're going to play an adult conceived game, right? And look, there's nothing wrong with that, because we're talking about our 9-year-old again now. He might want, or she, the feel of the World Cup. So, I know growing up, it used to annoy me when there wasn't nets, right? Because kids love scoring, right? So there's all these kind of elements that we do have to be aware of. And you can have a game that dribble as many balls out of an area in a warm-up game as possible. You want to work on dribbling. And you have 5 guys outside, 5 guys inside, right? And they're trying to stop each other, and you have 30 seconds on the clock, okay? And, okay, if you have 20 players, you have a lot of players or whatever, you can weight that if you feel you need to. We might talk about it later about biological age and all that kind of, but just medium, stronger, weaker guys to some degree. Or you can work that in multiple different ways. Or on Tuesday night, you can do it where they're a little bit more separated on levels of strength, and then you can let them explore it against various strengths the next night. But that could be working on dribbling, no pressure, get it out. It's kind of fun. It's kind of games. These guys are trying to stop us. How many balls do you get out in 30 seconds or a minute or whatever you're going to want? Right? So then that's a constraint. They're in an area and they're the task to get it out, and you've got opposition guys working against them. For a bit of fun in a practice like that, or in your 5v5 or whatever you want, lads, if anybody does the Neymar thing today in the next 10-minute game, the next goal after that is worth 5 goals. Right? So we're rewarding. And the coach then has to realize, though, that there's going to be some silly stuff go on. And they're going to, but we're giving them autonomy to try. They're using the famous player, right? Which is an important element. Like there's bottom up, top down. We might get into it with the academy stuff. Like we want people to explore their talent, ability, and all that kind of stuff as well. If they're asking for that, there's something in them. So it isn't easy, by the way, Mike. Like dealing with multi-skilled kids who could have 2 or more years of a biological age difference. If you're working with the under 9s, and a guy's born in January who happens to be an early developer versus a guy born in December who happens to be a slower developer. And let's say there's a village team and you only have 12, 15 kids anyway. And it's not like, not that I agree with this, but it's not an A, B, C, D team. You're going to have to be creative in that environment. So that's a basic way I would look at, so I would even do this at adult level. So to bring that all the way up, I would use repetitive practices. You'd have seen these types of practices in soccer. I would have taken some of the ideas from soccer where there's a goal, a halfway goal at the end line, and you 4v4s or 4v3s, and you guys coming in at different angles, and that repetitive practice you could work on. What we would do in Gaelic football, for instance, is we would have a +1 at one side, +2 at the other, 3v3, v3, v3, up and down, up and down. Or you might have cones where it's 5v3, but 2 guys got to go wide, right? And just repeat. And they're just getting the ideas of running from angles, from width in, which is an important part of the Gaelic football, late runs in at angles, playing against a +1. Then within 90 seconds, you're playing against +2 and all that kind of stuff. But within a practice like that, right, I might also add weak-sided scores only. Okay, or so there's 6 or 8 minutes, or I might do that for 2 minutes. I might do, we need to punch a point, or we need, like I was talking to you before we got on, crossfield kick pass before any score, right? So we're playing a kind of repetitive practice, but we can't score till we've done at least one crossfield kick pass. So we're practicing things that we'd like to work on. And then involving the players, like what would you, and this is no different to the Neymar, with the 9-year-old. So the players come up with something they want to work on, and you have this repetitive practice. So that's using constraints, right? I'm constraining the final act. And that's restraining almost, right? Some people would query is it over constraining in a way? But we're giving them opportunities, with a very deliberate approach. And that might create some chats and questioning, right? How does our long ball crossfield kick work? Are we getting guys to the back post? Are we getting support around the big man? Yeah, what's the kicking like? And it's endless. So, and the same concept is there with the 9-year-old. So I think it's giving them the opportunity to practice stuff in a safe place. If a coach wants to add technical practice as part of the session, probably on the same team, I think maybe there's a place for that, right? Personally, I prefer creating games that emphasize passing or any of the things I spoke about, right? And with those kids then, right, maybe having a coach or using an assistant coach, pulling them out and helping. How could you, using questioning cleverly, or maybe a technical intervention, right? If they're really struggling, how about trying this, Johnny, right? And I think that's where, because we're allowing everybody explore stuff then, they're self-organizing, right? I know that term throws some people off, but we're not giving them too much unless they really need it or really ask for it, or we feel it's inhibiting their development at a significant stage where, okay, come out there for Johnny. You look at Timmy over there, see what he's doing, right? Do you think you could try that? If they're very shy, if they're introverted, not willing to. So that's using constraints. And even the language we use, and when we talk to them, we're constraining them. So if we say, going back to basic skills, this is the only way, because that's what, for basic skills, that's what that means to me. We're probably starting to restrict in some fashion.
Yeah, and I guess that the analogy I've used and seen before is you can, if you're asking them to get the ball from A to B, rather than going, well, we want you to strike the ball, your lace under here to do this, do that. It's like, actually, can you get the ball from A to B? And if you look at a golfer's swing, all of them are very different, but they're all very skilled. So actually, it's can you get this golf ball down the middle of that fairway? Have a go, and then we'll assess what that looks like beyond that. That's
task simplification.
Yeah.
Give them a task and see what happens. And then the coach has to observe. Where are our weaknesses then? These guys are good at dribbling. These guys just boot the ball down the field, and that's the skill of it.
We said there kind of that task simplification. You can then, the addition is, okay, before you go from A to B, you now have to combine with 2 other teammates. So all of a sudden, there is a discussion around who am I going to combine with? Where am I going to combine with on the pitch? And what strategies can I use within the game to get that outcome? Because again, like across all sports, it's cyclical in terms of people following trends. We spoke about this off air before in terms of zigging when other people zag. If everyone's pressing really high up the pitch and is trying to be aggressive when the ball back there, actually it might be more sensible to skip 2 units, play off your front man and combine there. Or once you've done that a couple of times and everyone's then dropped off because they don't want to keep having that happen, now we might combine closer to our own goal. So then you're obviously allowing them to explore what the game like and also get some strategies around that as well.
And I think we can connect this back to movement before skill, movement with skill, the 6 to 9-year-olds if you want, right? Without ever talking about it now, we can introduce them to through over around games. So even their feel and their movement and their creativity to, get around people. And if we play any of the traditional bulldog or, any of those games are giving the kids some kind of introduction to that. We could then, probably at 9 or 10, I think kids start getting attached to the sport, okay, a little bit more. We could start doing it with the games, like we've explained there, you know, no man's land in any sport is going to create a need to go over. So and then we're also working on long kicking practice in soccer, for instance, or, you know, so once you go over the no man's land, then you can attack into the other zone or anything like that, you know. What I call the Ajax game, it's just a game with width, you know, having guys on the width that you have to play to the winger and replace them, and you're giving pass and move, and you're playing with width, you know. So, and then overloads and underloads give us the opportunity to go through. Generally, if we overload attackers, it's likely, but we won't tell them, it's likely they'll go through, or they might, and very often they won't go through the first time, but once they start figuring out after a couple of runs of the game or whatever, and then you're up to 9, 10, 11, 12, and you have helped develop a tactically aware child or youth, without ever talking about 4-4-3 or, you know, anything like that. Do you know what I mean?
So if we move this on to, obviously, when we were discussing around people kind of dropping out around different ages and stuff, and how that, I guess, affects when you do begin to get to those 13s, 14s, 15 age groups, you end up with people that look like us, that have got full-grown beards and fully developed, compared to little Timmy, who's still currently in the body of a 10-year-old. From your experience, how challenging is it to manage that dynamic, and what, I guess, stopgaps can you put in place to try and support those age groups to retain people within their pathway?
It's absolutely phenomenally challenging, I think, for people who work with 12, 13, 14, 15 range. Just in Ireland anyway, just into secondary school, a whole lot of new stuff happening. So there's a psychosocial part of it that we can't forget, right? The challenges, I don't think NGBs, it's adult ideas imposed on children or youth, right? And what I mean by that is competition structures. That's a major problem for me. So we are obsessed with championship and Gaelic games in Ireland. And that's fine at adult level in particular, and maybe some of the older youths, let's say 17s, 18s, 19s, whatever. Where, again, naturally, psychologically, biologically, people start becoming more competitive. They start becoming more embedded in their groups, you know, and it starts to mean more, and they want to win things at 17, 18, 19. And I've often noticed that losing at those ages, teams that lose at those ages tend to keep more players at adult, which is an interesting phenomenon. I don't have any data to back that, but it's an anecdotal experience. Whereas teams that win at 13 and 14 have very poor retention. And I did do some case study work on that in the past, right? So, but with those ages, I think we need to forget about adult structures. Now, this is not going to happen tomorrow, and we still obsessed with the championship. And even really well-meaning people, coaches, friends of mine, people I have great time for, get dragged into this with under 13, under 14, under 15 teams, like championship, right? So we have to have our best team for championship. Okay, so if championship was a standalone competition, and that basically championship it's a bit like a World Cup, the way it is in Gaelic games. You play a few group games, and there'll be quarterfinal, semi-final, final. Okay, and the league is very secondary, right? But to have your best team ready for championship, you need to practice with your best team in the league. So then we're automatically leaving guys on the bench till 10 minutes to go. So there is that problem, right? And I understand the conundrum, you know, we want to do well for the people who are, because at that age, some kids will be very into winning and competitive and all that. So I think teams and clubs need to be brave. That's the first thing. And they need information and knowledge and support, right? And that long term, well, what is the character of your club, and what are your principles, right? Do you want to keep them to the 19, 20? Or is it just survivorship bias and we'll have the best players for the senior team? Because some clubs have said that straight out to me, right? I don't agree with that, right? Morally, I think it's suspect, but so be it, you know? So I think you want to introduce different levels of kids to different environments and different challenges. So I would be trying and hoping to rethink the competition structures completely and look at least maybe up to under 15 and below at more festival approaches, weekend, jamboree type games, and that we can still have the championship. Okay? And we can still have even regional rep teams at 14 or 15 to a certain degree. Just an introduction. You bring in 5, 6, 8 players from each club, and yeah, you can play South versus West versus East or whatever. And that they're just being exposed to that. So the better players over a weekend, because what we don't realize is we don't need to have them together all the time. We're not forming teams like adults, professional, or even high level amateur, or whatever the case may be. Teams where they need to be together, build a bond and all that. You want to see how people work in an environment. So the better players, yeah, there's no problem with giving them challenge and mixing them up. I've had this idea with the last couple of years where, so in Ireland, again, I'm going back to Gaelic Games, we have places in the country with, you know, somewhere between 3 and 8 kids on the age every year. So the under 14 team will be made up of 12, 13 and 14-year-olds. Okay? So obviously they're going to struggle to challenge the city teams, who might have 2 teams largely made up of 14-year-olds. Okay? And that's just demographics. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But couldn't we have a tournament where you introduce these country teams and we get the city teams to commit to picking 4 9-a-side teams and putting their 12 best players on each team, as in like they're pick 3 for each team and having 4 teams, and the country team might have 2 teams if they're lucky, or they might only have 1 team, but they go into a tournament with all these teams and they play some of these big names, right? For them, their development, they're still kind of playing at a level where the watered down, for want of a better description now, of the stronger clubs. The stronger clubs are getting all their players playing with each other and being challenged. So those very strong A players who happen to be with a team that have a few middling players, for want of a better description, let's say less developed players, or players who are developing slower, which is very common, right? They get the opportunity to lead them. They get the opportunity to work with these players, to work on their empathy, to, you know, because at the A grade, they're probably playing with 10 or 12 exceptional players who make their life a little bit easier. So we can challenge them by supporting them at their club where they're actually really pushed and constrained by the team they're playing with, right? And the benefits are endless in this. And then, yes, let's bring them and have a competition at the end of the year where all the A teams play each other and all the B teams play each other. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just that we have got too far into grading and having adult type competitions. So I think NGBs, people in clubs, need to get creative, right, in how we structure competitions. Because if we're the adults, we have the information, okay? We realize, like, we can't be, I often hear, sure, the kids love it. Or I asked my young fella and he said he loves it. I mean, it's n=1 for a start. But it's like, you know, they're going to tell you what they feel you need to hear. Or we're the adults and create competition. And very, very quickly, I think, and I don't have all the answers, I don't know how these things would work out per se, but you do need to try things. So I think that's the big problem, is that we're not giving everybody enough opportunities to work at different levels.
So I guess the challenge back will be for some individuals is when you look at that top end, or you're looking at players at, you know, 17, 18, 19, that then might start making the jump to senior ranks and playing in men's games or playing in some sports professionally. if they only get exposed to real competitive fixtures at those older age groups, they haven't necessarily learnt the skills of winning, losing, or the skills of meaningful competition and how I prepare myself for it, and not getting over anxious or not getting over aroused or under aroused, all that type of stuff, until it's potentially too late because they're already in that environment. How do you think you manage that in terms of it's still allowing individuals to have that preparation for when they maybe do go into those environments?
Well, I still think like you can have competitions that are unrepresentative, say at under 16, under 17, that are designated to being, for want of a better description, the elite competition. Once you start selecting guys, they know it's better. So and I think as well, you see, you get over that hump of a few things. It's just delaying it a little bit, Michael. I think actually that's, I agree with what it's a very good point, right? I would suggest it's a little bit more relevant to the professional world, to be fair, right? And I don't have enough experience in your world to really comment on how those guys are prepared, My initial reaction is that's not a strong enough challenge, right? But I'm not against. I think it's a consideration, and I don't think we should not have competition. And at 16, I've always said post-puberty. That's obviously a broad spectrum, right? But we can have some representative stuff, and like anything. I'm around kids. You are as well. Youths, teenagers. Like, just listen to the way they talk. They know everything about everything. And if we change, and they know about talking about the guy Saturday or Sunday in that game we lost, they knew about the number 8, the point guard. Like, he was the man to stop. If he does this, he won't do this. You know what I mean? And he's not even in the same city as us. So, so they understand the structures, they understand the teams coming through, they understand selection. So I think you can still have that stuff. We just don't have to make it a whole season where we take them away at 11, 12, 13 from their mates, for instance.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have to stop putting them into challenging environments. It's just how we do it and for how long.
And being structured with it, being mindful that actually, don't have it where they're in an environment that isn't best for them, because they're playing in their own age group where actually biologically being up might be more beneficial to them, for example.
And that is often it. Like, have a kind of a bandwidth where we can introduce players to, and you're long enough involved that I might think a 14-year-old is ready to play under 16. And he goes there and I'm like, Jesus, I got that wrong. And the other guys, who's smaller, maybe less developed, finds a little space in the team because maybe the team was missing it. And there's no black and white rules. We do have to, and this takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of work from the NGBs to help clubs do this because, we're talking 98% farmers, accountants, teachers are the coaches, so we can't expect them to sit down and learn about the neurobiology of a 15-year-old, or the psychosocial development of an urban town versus, so they need support in this. But I do think, in a very broad one-liner, it's the adultification of children and youth sport is where we went wrong. And we kept going down and down and creating competitions. Now, we are reversing that. And this is what often happens. We go too far one way and we find ourselves back in the middle. But it's just that we learn the lessons along the way to give the children the opportunity. And it is top down, bottom up. We do want the kids who really want to be the best, who really want to make the rep teams, whether they're good enough or not. We have to be able to give them the opportunity to do that as well. It's an important part of sport. There's no Neymar without that. That's but I just think kids figure out the selective processes, you create a new competition, and you tell them this is the best competition that there is, or this is a representative competition, this is a competition. They know what it is. You know, it'll sort itself out over a couple of years.
And so you've mentioned a couple of times there, I guess, around the selection, deselection body of work. And I think this ties quite nicely into kind of academies, which I think ultimately global wide in some capacity. Seems to be academy there. I know I saw on a site the other day that a Juventus academy that was based out of Kent. I'm thinking that's a hell of a trip to Turin from Kent. But yeah, I guess from your experiences within that space and from understanding, you mentioned the kind of psychological, social element of this, which I think is quite big. What would gold standard academy format potentially look like, in your opinion, if at all?
For me, introduction to under 15. So that's a big bridge maybe for some people, because there's academies out there. We know, and like this will always be thrown at me, like I could be wrong now, but like Bayern Munich or Ajax are doing this, or you know, and I'm like, that doesn't necessarily make it right. And they may be doing it for other reasons, and they may not even want to do it. Like, that's what I've heard from people who've worked in academies, funnily enough. We know some of this stuff could be done a little bit better, but here we are, and we're trying to do the best with what we have, which I think is absolutely legitimate. But for me, my experiences started introducing representative work at under 15. So that's going to involve 14-year-olds. And my experience is that of good players that were sent into squads that I was involved in, about half of them were psychologically ready for it. Okay? So I think we're on that cusp then. And that's, look, as a coach then, I was saying this to one of the other guys, and he was like, well, maybe it's our job to help that other half bridge the gap. And I said, fair enough. You know, that's a good way of looking at it. You know, and that's a challenge for us then. So somewhere around, now, my experience is as probably as extensive as yours in that academy kind of structure. But so I that's what the first starting point. Okay. And you have a better chance of being, players are more ready at that age, although not exclusively ready, to be rejected. So if we're going to think about the individual, right, at those ages, they're a little bit more, they've been in school, secondary school, there's a little bit more of winning and losing in life, right? They've started to cognitively process some of that stuff, and their parents will have a handle on them and know what to say to them. And, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff matters, right? And physically, a few fellas have got their growth spurts. Girls, obviously, girls probably a little bit earlier. And they're figuring themselves out just that little bit more. It's never going to be perfect, okay? So I think that's the first starting point. And we all know that there's lots of stuff before that is deselecting, even by accident, right? And I don't have any data on this, right? But anecdotally, I have spoken to people involved in academies over the years, and some of them do follow-up work. And I know there's loads of clubs really trying really hard to make sure that if someone is deselected, that they continue in the sport. But some of them would report that up to 50% stop playing sport, right? At all, on a 12-month follow-up. So there's something in that, okay? And I think we know that anyway. But that might be for many reasons, and we may not keep all those kids in sport anyway. There is a possibility those kids, if they just were in a regular club system, would have deselected themselves over time anyway, right? We don't know. But, so that's the starting point for me. Then, I think it's just traveling, and an excessive travel is a drain on families and people and the kids themselves. So organizations, if you're on an under 15 National League team or Premier League squad or whatever, you know, the sport might be, reducing the travel, or again, having tournaments, if there has to be travel, that we bring them away for a week in the summer to London, let's say, and all the Category 1 clubs and Category 2 clubs play, tournaments, and they're getting that exposure. See, my feeling is we don't need to expose them to these high levels as much as we think at those ages. Like, if we go to a tournament with a Southampton or Chelsea under 15 team, let's say, for argument's sake, and they get exposed to playing against Barcelona or whoever, right? That's so much information for the coaches and the players. Look, this is the level, right? We know, and I say this to teams I work with at a coaching level, like, are we good enough to win this year? We don't know. But the worst thing that can happen is we find out what we need to do, right? So, and again, it goes back to, I do believe in exposing kids or people within reason. There's no point in putting a D grade player with a representative team, you know what I mean, or someone out of their depth. But within reason, exposing them to the big city clubs, the international teams, or and all the levels up, and the kid realizes, and the coach realizes, okay, we have a ways to go, or we're on the right path, maybe. You know what I mean? And so I don't think we need as much of the constant full season leagues and things like that as maybe it's gone. Okay, I don't know what the mechanism is like to say have kids play locally and representatively. I think that varies a little bit. Gaelic Games doesn't have that problem, to be honest, because you have to play with your club or you're not allowed to play with the company. It's just like, that's just the way it is. And the club is kind of the constant. So it's a slightly different system. So, my experiences there are slightly different to say the professional soccer world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess from a soccer perspective, you're allowed to play counties in terms of school, and you're allowed to play district if your club lets you, and some clubs don't. I've known of some clubs that go, absolutely not. You're not allowed to do that. I'm fortunate the club.
Can I ask you there, Michael? Right, because there's some relative experiences here that I'm going through at the moment, right? And it's more about not allowing them to play other sports, okay, as opposed to playing, right? But why do you think a club would do that? Is it fear of injury? Is it control? Is it insurance? Or what is it?
Two bits, I think. Partly because of injury, and partly because of the being afraid of missing out. So not being at this session continuously means you fall behind in this aspect or something like that. Now, I'll be honest, I'm really fortunate. The club that I work with in Southampton, we actively encourage that, particularly at the younger age groups. It's just kind of, you've got a school tournament or school game, go and play. Like, it's important to play with your friends. If you've got a tag rugby tournament, absolutely go and do it. And if you can, send the coaches a picture of you with your friend with a thumbs up or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we understand the importance of them not wearing our badge 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
But that, I'll be honest, that isn't always common practice. And I'm fully aware of some clubs are a site, absolutely not. Once you're registered, that can't happen.
Well, it's important that it is happening anywhere, even in one place. And I'm sure there's more places than Southampton. I know there is, actually.
Yeah.
Places with similar attitude, And I suppose it is that brick by brick approach, Michael, that people like me and you talking, and all the people that inspire us or we work with, or, sharing that kind of stuff. From the thing that jumps out to me there is a misunderstanding of learning. The idea that, and I was guilty of this myself in the past, we were all inexperienced, and I'm still inexperienced. And if I'm doing the same stuff next year as I'm doing this year 100%, then I'm not going anywhere. But that one training session could be vital to learning. I was nuts. I was going to say that's nuts, but like, I have new information over the last number of years. I've searched out learning, how we learn, motor learning, really, really extensively, and I'm still on that journey. How humans learn. It's so fragmented, non-linear, all over the shop, influenced by the car ride home, the other sports we play, the school we go to, the culture, what the teachers are, what our parents are like. and it's never going to be that one session. And I think that's possibly on coach education, which is, it's the Wild West in ways.
Yeah, and I think, listen, I think it's twofold,
I'm
right?
not talking about soccer there per se, or the English FA, or anyone, but it's just that it's all over the place.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that, and I think that, listen, it's probably a little bit egotistical in terms of the coaching point of view to think that actually the one session I'm going to do is going to make all that difference, because it probably isn't. But I also think the other side, and this is probably where it aligns for me personally, is a really nice quote that I had was, people remember how you make them feel, not what you said. So actually, if we're talking about creating holistic individuals, or helping create holistic individuals, or we're helping trying to reach the person before the player, all these straplines that everyone has, actually, if I keep saying no to everything, what's that overriding feeling that they're going to have?
Yeah.
Whereas if I say to them, yeah, and tell me about it, or that's amazing that you've done that. Could you, when you get back, could you write me just half a page on how that made you feel doing that event? Or if you've got video, come and share it with all the coaches. We'd love to see it. How do you think that young person feels about you, about your interaction, so that then when maybe I do come to try and help them on the coaching side, where does that change? What does that look like by having those? Now, some people will turn around and say it makes absolutely no difference. You're in a powerful position. They'll listen to you. They'll do as you say. They'll improve. I'm more of the standing that I think actually having that human connection helps them develop and helps a boy develop. So yeah, for me, I think there's that emphasis around multi-exposure not only helps them in terms of different environments, different kids, different coaches, different learnings, but also strengthens your bond with them as a person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. People respond so well to you encouraging them to explore whatever. And I mean, you can't have hard and fast rules, or like I would say to people, where we have some conflict overload of parts of the season, or a crossover, whatever, that's fine. But look, let's say Gaelic football, 1st of May onwards, we're going to need a commitment. But I'm okay with everything else before that. Certainly at adult or competitive levels, maybe you do need to have those, even from a loading point of view, like those kind of chats. But yeah, it's a constant challenge. People don't seem to see the benefits of it. Look, ultimately, that the idea that coaches have the information, we are the teachers, and we're going to give you the information, and also a little bit of a control thing happens a lot, and they feel the need to control. And if I'm not in control, I don't know what's happening, right? And like I had a scenario here last season where a group of coaches from a representative team in Gaelic football came to watch basketball because they'd seen and heard so much about the local club and what they were doing and the good coaching and blah, blah, blah. And there was a couple of players who actually overlapped, right? So he was playing basketball and he was playing representative football. And they went away, whatever they got out of it. But then they stopped him playing basketball. It was just incredible. I'm a long way out from competition. So they saw the value of the basketball practice, or enough to go and turn up and watch it. And then within a very short space of time, they told him he couldn't play basketball anymore if he wanted to stay on the team. So and it's, I do, and then a lot of people do hide behind the moniker of, oh, we're afraid of the load. I don't believe that's the case a lot of the time, to be honest. But it is heartening to hear that there is that approach within academies. But then I've always known, and everybody knows, there's loads and loads and loads of good people working in these places with very highly qualified, loads of experience, with a very developmental and connection-based approach to coaching. And if you connect with people, they are going to enjoy it more. If they're going to enjoy it more, they're going to be motivated intrinsically more. If they're more intrinsically motivated, they're probably going to work on their weaknesses that you're always thinking about. Geez, I'd love if he worked on that, or at least it makes those conversations 100 times easier.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that one really nice video, and we actually showed it to the parents at Southampton this year, was Jamie Carragher spoke on a podcast around his son being in an academy. And he basically said, I never once think my son will play in Liverpool's first team. That's where he's at Liverpool. He said, but I liken it to them being a private school with some really good practitioners that can take care of him and support him. He'll get some amazing experiences of going away places and whatnot. He said, and I hope that that will, provide him some really good memories. He goes, I'm not worried about the end goal. And the kind of bit that resonated for me is that actually, if you had that approach within these elite settings, which is, let's just focus on, you're going to get some really insightful coaching if it's monitored properly. And from our end, you're going to get some really good experiences and you're going to make some new friends. Let's not worried about the selection top end. Let's not worried about the end goal. Let's just focus on this little bit now. That would potentially, from a psychological point of view, put the boys and parents and everyone in a much different headspace. And then if you go, if you carry on in this rate, you're going to be the next Harry Kane, which is very, very unlikely.
I do think there's a little bit there. I don't know. It probably happens naturally enough in Gaelic games, but in soccer, I've noticed it happens since they started the under-13 national leagues here. I'm talking to parents, really, who are involved, is when they are deselected, they're too far away from their home club. And what I mean by that is psychosocially. So, and then they have to go back. And there was a kid coming to me here doing SSC last season, and he'd been on international squads. So he was a high-level goalkeeper. But he got let go by Cork City. But he hadn't played with his local team for 2 years.
Mm.
And I could sense, he didn't say this, but I could sense that was a challenge for him. And I found out afterwards, which is another challenge and maybe another conversation. Within one game, he was the goalkeeper for that team, right? So, okay, maybe talent-wise, that was an obvious thing. But what about the guy who played for the last 2 years?
Yeah.
So there's a conflict there, and I wonder, I don't have the answers to that. So they're big questions as well, like how do you keep a connect? How do you keep people playing, I suppose, after they give up, after deselection? But there's absolutely no doubting that approach. I think there's a good video out there as well for Richard Dunn, or maybe he spoke off the ball or something. Similar to Carragher's, but it's a really good, inspiring discussion, because I think his son is somewhere. I don't know if it's in England or Ireland, but he's in some academy. And that attitude that, we're going to have a good experience, who knows what's going to happen, would be really refreshing if it became the norm. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a big if. So last question for me, which is, if I were to ask the people you work with or the players that you coach, how would you like them to describe you as a practitioner?
How would you like? That I give everybody a chance. That would be a big thing. That I follow through on what I say, which can be a challenge sometimes, particularly with competitive adult teams and stuff. Like if we're going to have these standards and, someone's not training enough, we're not going to play them. That's something we have to follow through on sometimes. Or we are actually going to select based on training or things like that. So I think following through on what I say is a big thing for me. And if I don't do it in any way, it kind of affects me, that's something I keep an eye on. So that I care and that I follow through on what I say I'm going to do. I find coaching now that I'm a bit more experienced is very much give and take. And I suppose I've got to a place where, like I respond to effort from the players now. And last year was a significant one where, the culture there was very positive in terms of effort and, before I ever got there, So it made me work harder. And I suppose that might be the third part, that he works hard for us. So you care, you work hard, and you follow through on what you're going to say. You follow through on what you say. They'd probably be the things.
Perfect. Listen, Kevin, I think a really good conversation in terms of, considerations of, when people are in these pathways, or when you're working with young people and young players and stuff, actually, what effect are you having on them? And how can you give them the best experiences and have longevity within whatever sport, or hopefully a variety of sports? So yeah, really good conversation. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
I really appreciate being asked on, Michael, and it was very enjoyable. Thanks very much.
No worries at all. Catch up again soon. Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.